walked in and remembered we used to throw parties in this room. I guess the student union is still there.
Yeah.
And I couldn't remember that the Courier office was there. I thought it was going to be like, I guess it was always there. So good to be back. And I did a, before Capilano, in their infinite neoliberal wisdom, killed the Studio Arts program, which was up there. They had a postgraduate program for arts and for mid-career artists and stuff. And also in their infinite wisdom, they built a postgraduate media arts program that I was one of 2 students in. It ran for 1 year. And they built a beautiful studio right behind that wall. So I had a private darkroom, media lab, did 2 exhibitions that year, one on the history of Weyahwitchin, Cates Park to Maplewood Flats. So how artists and squatters used these kind of interstitial spaces between kind of colonial displacement and park spaces, and I put that up in the Capilano University Gallery. And another show called Access to Grind, which is very meaningful now with the U.S. war on Iran. But I produced a photo exhibition and curated a film festival, and that toured around Canada, and I produced that behind that wall there. So Access to Grind looked at axis of evil and how that kind of narrative promotes weapons sales, because of course these Western powers need bogeymen to, ramp up weapons sales. So looking at how the axis of evil was sort of a use for Canadian foreign policy to kind of dovetail U.S. war hawk policy. Because at the same time, Canada was not allowing North Korea to put up an embassy in Ottawa or have cultural or sporting exchanges or normalize relationships, right? So there's always this duplicity, this dualism in foreign policy where we present ourselves as this kind of bastion of liberal democracy, but at the same time we're total hypocrites when we actually punish countries that don't follow particular economic systems and things. So that's kind of what that project was about. It was really kind of a communication study on how a discourse analysis of foreign policy, but told through photography and film. That, I guess, is a segue to how I got from being a photographer and I think, what was I?
Urbanese, art curator.
But in terms of
the
Courier back then, I think I was there was an events listing. I was the editor of the events listing. Yeah. And I remember going to shows and photographing bands and publishing them, and I'm not sure. So
the Billboard editor.
Billboard editor, there you go. But I think also I was one legendary, maybe one less legendary writing instructors, Ed Laval. I was like 17 when I started here, so that seems weird. Grew up in North Van, Dutch settler family. So Ed Laval, who later became the president of the BC NDP, and Stan Persky, queer, Marxist, poli-sci instructor, thinking like I was 17 and I was learning from these kind of legends in BC politics, which I guess that all those experiences, you don't necessarily know it in the moment, that they open windows. And we need windows, especially in dark times. So I remember student union politics, I averaged probably C- in all my courses. Never really finished anything. Learned, left, did stuff with that knowledge. I was producing shows. Nardwar, the Human Serviette, did his first shows, and we go way back, and would book all ages venues, and learned, kind of really was very disruptive in politics and from a youth perspective. This is the 80s, so by youth, for youth was like a mantra we kind of came up with, a kind of DIY mantra. And that was profound because by youth, for youth was really much, now it's sort of normalized, I think, youth rights and youth, like back then, you could do basketball and you could do hockey and I'm not sure what else you could do, but it certainly wasn't punk rock, and it certainly wasn't music and DJing, and it wasn't anything to do with culture. So I would book community halls in North Van, pay like $600 on a Friday night like this to host parties, and eventually it was like, well, hang on, like, why am I paying $600 to do community service that the Recreation Commission should be paying, and why am I carrying the risk when they spend millions on hockey for youth? So I would organize shows, and then I eventually did a protest concert up front of Sealand Hall. And I was like, oh, wow, this is kind of easy. Like, you just need a generator, and it's the same as doing a hall show, but it's outdoors. And then I was like, oh, this is like there's a tent, there's a generator, soundboard, bands. And so then I was like, oh, that's like a festival. So then that year I started under the Volcano Festival, which grew for 20 years. It was the largest political arts festival in Canada every year, and collaborated with other good people doing that. It was very ahead of its time. We were very much a hotbed and a platform for Indigenous sovereigntists. This is when Canada and BC really, really saw anyone who had sovereignty ideas, who was First Nations, were radical, very much at the margins. Colonialism is alive and well now, but colonialism was really hardcore back then, and any kind of challenge to that would be seen as kind of anti-state, anti-authoritarian. And so if you were an Indigenous rights activist or a sovereigntist defending your land, you were extremely criminalized by the state. And if you were a lawyer advocating for those rights, so that's the kind of politics of that era. So under the volcano at Kate's Park at Wayouichin was very, very different, way ahead of its time. We're also ahead of our time in trans and queer rights. Most of the crew were queer, and we platformed trans artists. We, on the poster for the festival, we named the site Wayouichin, which is totally unheard of at the time. We were the first cultural project in Vancouver that named the Indigenous name for the site. So this is kind of giving you some kind of touch points in terms of like how things have changed. Fast forward, I did a graduate. So I didn't really do much in C minuses, but I learned a lot, was the point. And that DIY, but mixing with real world experiences like publishing a paper and taking photographs, and most of them screw up and some of them are really good, and then going in the darkroom and learning those skills, working with other people, something struggling. Back then it was very much left-right split in the student union. I'm not sure how it is now, but I mean, the Canadian Federation of Students was started like 2 years before I started organizing, and we were already wanting it to be dead because it was just like so stuck in mainstream binaries, and it wasn't really a progressive movement-based system, which youth and students do around the world. Most youth and students around the world are organized in movement structure, not like an NGO structure. And so I don't credit my educational experience here per se. It's more the student organizing, the student newspaper work that I did. That's really where I learned how to do things, organize things, administer things, work with people, do committees. And I think around like, so that was 84 to 87. And I was doing shows and concerts and events. So I was like, okay, of course my mom wasn't really impressed with that. So she convinced me to do marketing management here. And I was like, okay, well, I kind of do want to do music promotion and promote shows, and I'm a promoter. So anyway, so did a year of that, 2-year program, left. That's the sort of the way I rolled. It's like learn skills, apply them immediately. I was always too busy there's always like consequences of those decisions. Like, okay, can I hold on to this? No, I'm gonna just apply it. Did print production, learned printing. People were learning to do desktop publishing at the time. And we weren't allowed to touch desktop publishing. This was like PageMaker, Quark Express. It's like the precursors to InDesign, etc. So I was like, okay, I'm out of here. So I did like 6 months of that, and I quit. Started a newspaper. It was called Art Test, ARTEST, Art Test. Opened up a youth art gallery at 3rd and Lonsdale, North Van. I remember doing a show about the Gwangju massacre that had happened in South Korea. The Utney Reader, the Whole Earth Review, one of those, had a advertisement with a show that happened in California. It was like this youth show of prints that had been smuggled out of Gwangju, where the authorities had killed thousands of people who were resisting U.S. occupation of South Korea. So I'm like pretty young, put up a show on that subject. So learning curating skills, learning marketing skills, learning community outreach skills. So I think that's my main work. It's always been this praxis of like having theory of how things need to change, and then learning the technical skills, whether it's photography or web design or making short videos. I made short films. I went to Emily Carr again. Was the president of the student union briefly, and then quit Emily Carr. But when I was at Emily Carr, I was producing videos. One on police abuse in Vancouver, one on Act Up, Fight Back on gay rights and HIV rights, AIDS activism. This is when you still edited video manually. And then went to Central America, and I can't remember the details, but I remember I was living in San Jose, Costa Rica, with this person, the only female AP photographer in Latin America. I can't remember how we met up, so I was living in San Jose and going to the Quaker Center, which are like Friends Service Center. I don't know if you know Quakers and Mennonites, but it's a particular progressive humanist worldview, and they were hosting these conversations about like the U.S. war in Central America. And my housemate had a press pass. We went to Nicaragua. I got a presidential press pass. I think I was 21, and had some crazy experiences. Going like in a Russian helicopter with Sandinista soldiers to the front lines, where they were pushing the U.S.-backed Contras back into Honduras. And on the, I'm getting chills and memories of that. So the person on the flight, I guess in terms of this storytelling, it's important to tell also like these influential moments in my life. That's definitely an influential moment. But the person who was on the flight with me, Brian Wilson, not from the band, but he wrote a book called Blood on the Tracks, and that's because he was a U.S. Vietnam vet, and he organized protests to stop the U.S. sending weapons to Central America. California, outside of a U.S. military base, they laid down on the tracks, the train didn't stop, he lost both of his legs. 6 months later, I'm with him at a press conference between the U.S., between the Sandinista government and the negotiators for a peace deal in Central Nicaragua, and I'm flying with him in a helicopter to the front lines, thinking to myself like, oh, here's this important person, and not realizing like later, like, wow, he just lost his leg 6 months later, and here he is. So those moments have a big, profound effect. And I remember he said to me, why don't you go back to the belly of the beast? And I was doing kind of human rights photography and journalism. I filed an article at the Toronto Star on the peace deal, peace negotiations. McGill Daily at the time, McGill University had a daily newspaper, student newspaper that was daily in Montreal. Filed articles with that. And so I'm still doing student journalism, but I'm also filing other stories. A couple of years later, I spent about 10 or 12 months in Central America, and then a year or two later, did the same in the Philippines. So I learned a lot about political work in the Philippines, and that's when there was a lot of war happening, and did a lot of human rights photography, kind of in a witnessing model. You have that right now in Palestine, in the West Bank, where you have international youth who are witnessing Israeli atrocities and kind of human rights impact. So that's a really amazing work that one can do, is being a peace witness or witness to folks who are struggling. Started a East Asian Canada Human Rights Organization. So basically, I organized with the Asian Students Association out of Hong Kong, and I would bring student leaders from East Asia to Canada for speaking tours to talk about what was happening in East Asia, Philippines, China, North and South Korea, Burma. I spent time in Burma. That's when the Burmese student movement, the government had shut down all the universities in Burma. Now it's called Myanmar. So they just released 4,000 prisoners a couple days ago. So students fled the cities and went into the jungles at the border of Thailand and started an army called the All Burma Students Democratic Front. And it was an army of about 8,000 students. Met with them. Most of those students died from malaria and from the war. So lots of intense experiences. But I think Brian's advice to go back to the belly of the beast was I did follow that. It probably took me a few years to figure that out, what that meant, and to activate that. And I think for a long time, I thought of my practice as an artist was kind of like building infrastructure. So I build community centers and work with other people to build festivals. But that solidarity spirit, what we see now around the Palestine Solidarity Movement, has always been hardwired into my practice. And I really appreciate that while we fight for rights for everybody, I also really see that one of the challenges of liberal DEI politics is that we've moved, and I hope we move back from identity politics to solidarity politics, and that the liberation of people who are marginalized, who are oppressed through these capitalist patriarchal systems, that we seek our liberation through solidarity, not through individualism, not through sectarianism, not through separate struggles, that we're only, and we see it now with the rise of fascism, we're only protected when we're unified and in solidarity in a relationship with each other. But unfortunately, over that 20-year period, in the last 20, 30 years, we've lost that, right? So back in the day, you would be experiencing solidarity work from, like we've seen it with Palestine. Like that is a pretty amazing, as dark as the world is right now, it's pretty amazing how people are seeing intersectionality and interrelatedness of our work. Also in '86, I started working on Heard But Not Seen, which was a youth radio show on Co-op Radio. So spent a long time doing community radio and community TV. Used to host a show on Shaw Cable. It was an arts show. So always interested in different platforms. And I think that's one current is that I've always been committed to cross-media, multi-platform publishing. Always understanding that, if you're putting the labor in to do an audio interview or a video interview or just transcribe it. I mean, that's super easy with, I'm not a big fan of AI because that's a $1 trillion porn industry coming at us really fast. And technofascism and Palantir and all that stuff that's going to be creeping at us really, really fast. But AI transcribing quick notes, good piece of appropriate technology, and then localizing AI. So we're not using these large models. We're just using AI in a local context, in your organizational context. So that's the future, is the fight for ethical AI. I think it's too late. We're not going to get ethical AI. We're going to get dystopic AI. But we can also argue for local AI. So you can use the technology in your organization, on your servers, solving your own local problems. You don't have to do this techno-fascist version of AI. So I recognized things like when Hurricane Katrina was happening and Democracy Now! Exploded. I don't know if you all listen to Democracy Now!, but it exploded from like 300 stations to 1,200, partially because of Hurricane Katrina, because people wanted that daily access to this massive problem that was happening in the States. And they were there. They produced it. They had the distribution system, television, radio. And so I was inspired by that, and I sought out to build a community media center in Vancouver. It ended up being like also the largest underground nightclub. We had like 3,500 people. It's like 2009 to 2011. 3,500 people coming in at VFS. Now it's VFS, but on Cordova, 11 o'clock at night, and emptying the alley at 4 a.m. So still true to my spirit desire of throwing shows. But that center was also a media center, and we had a printing press, flatbed printing press. We had 2 radio stations. We had CJSF and Co-op Radio. We had TV stations, TV studio, co-working space, open media. We incubated open media, which became the largest Canadian petition campaign in the history of Canada around cellular data rates and stuff like that. So advocating for open technology, open source. Anyway, the city shut us down. The city of Vancouver evicted us. That's another story. And also, I think I hired too much of the crew were into throwing parties, and we kind of unified the underground scene, all the sub-scenes in Vancouver, the dubstep, the bass, house, techno, Japanese psytrance, like we brought everybody together. We could throw parties with 5 rooms. So it was really cool that it was like a festival every night, because people could go to shows in rooms. There'd be bass heavy hip hop scene over here, and there'd be like a Japanese psytrance over here. Those communities would never connect, right? But then there was this like huge open space between the rooms, and we had like this 50-foot bar, people. I knew it; they didn't know it. I knew what people wanted was the mingling in the space in between the rooms, right? And that's the same thing we did with Under the Volcano Festival. We did the first Indigenous hip hop shows in Canada. We did the first outdoor rave. We did folk music. We did Malcolm Lowry stage, which is a poetry stage. So doing punk rock, doing all these genres, bringing people together. We had 115 political organizations in one park in one day. And then we would print a guide to all the groups that were present. This is like pre-internet. And we would give everybody a guide with profiles of all the artists and all the bands. Knowing that guide that we distributed, that old school print, would be read by more people than would come to the festival. We would go to every single show, every single party for 2 months before the event, the festival. So we built that festival up to like 8,000 people because of that dogged grassroots, hand-to-hand relational organizing work, and using print and printing a magazine with an activist guide that would show the community this kind of unified possibility. And that's what we're missing right now, right? The fracturing, the sectarianism is really intense, and so coalition building is the way that we have to respond. So now we do the same sort of stuff. We do festivals, conferences. Today we just planted. I just worked with 30 high school students at Total Ed, this alternative school in Vancouver, and we planted a Coast native plant garden, took over a gravel schoolyard at 29th in Mount Pleasant, and we built this beautiful teaching garden full of Coast Salish plants, and it was super rad. Last night, we talked about FIFA for 2 hours, tomorrow, we're doing 6 hours land back school at Maplewood Flats. I'll briefly say that after helping run W2, the city evicted us. I started working for Tsleil-Waututh Nation, co-managing with Ruben George and Carlene Thomas the Trans Mountain Pipeline campaign. So that was a place-based thing. Grew up here in North Van, and thinking about how can we organize and stop this pipeline from going through Burnaby Mountain and putting more tankers in and dredging. So that was an exciting experience. Tsleil-Waututh took Canada to court, and much like now with elbows up, national interest, Tsleil-Waututh had their rights crushed over by Canada's narrative that they needed these pipelines, they need more tankers, they need more, even though it doesn't produce jobs and it's just exports dirty oil and puts the risk on Tsleil-Waututh. Tsleil-Waututh knew that, so they took Canada to court. But through that experience, then I realized there's this place. Again, remember I told the story about doing that art show about the history of the waterfront from Wayouch to to Maplewood Flats. So someone at Maplewood Flats was like, hey, do you want to help take over this board of directors? And I know how to run boards because I was in the pitched battles at the Capilano Courier and the Capilano Oostindie and all the pitched politics and administrative maneuverings. And so again, those skills of like organizing, administrating, Robert's Rules of Order, I use those and weaponize those to take over in a coup d'etat of this white supremacist birding organization that had 256 acres next to the Tsleil-Waututh Reserve right in North Van, right here on the waterfront. And so I'm saying that sort of tongue in cheek, but it was actually took 8 years. So long view, laser sharp focus, a lot of pushback, got a lot of haters. But I'm a Dutch settler. I'm okay. I'm also, see how I appear, right? I'm okay taking the hate because if I don't take that, Tsleil-Waututh is going to get it, right? They're going to get the white entitled settlers from North Vancouver. They're going to get the hate. And so it took 8 years, and now that organization is the first NGO in Canada that's surrendered control to a local First Nation community. So those skills I learned in student politics. I learned them through running organizations. So you never know really how you're gonna learn your photography, how you'll do your video skills or your photography skills or your illustration skills. But if you understand that these are technical skills you have, and you can find other coexisting, other skills that you can kind of mobilize with those skills, learn how to work with people, that you can get bigger and bigger things done. And don't worry about the future. Just focus on what you can do this month and this year, and learn some skills and apply them. I guess that's called praxis. So I'm late to academia because I don't think I really counted the school stuff I did earlier because I never really finished anything, and I didn't do well in school. But I learned a lot, and I've had an impact in my community, and I became so I never finished anything, but I have a master's degree, postgraduate certificate, and a graduate diploma, but I don't have an undergrad because I never finished anything. But I was accepted as a mature student at SFU and did a master's degree in the spectacle of reconciliation. So how reconciliation functions as spectacle, it kind of perpetuates colonialism. And we really need to focus on redress, not reconciliation. Redress is like reparations and also place-based redress. So what is our responsibility, especially settlers, what is our responsibility to the land here? So I'm fortunate to have grown up here and have had these long relationships with Tsleil-Waututh Nation to understand and to think reflexively on how many times I've screwed up. And you learn from those screw-ups. You don't kind of back away. You just kind of show up and you take accountability for screwing up. Protect those relationships, the ones that matter. And so that's what the land back school comes from, right? So we're doing land back school at Maplewood Flats, and then this fall we're going to build it out, scale it up across the province. So my argument is that we don't need to wait for the state or an overburdened First Nation to do land back. It's stuff that we can do. We can decolonize our organizations. We can be of service. We can allocate, reappropriate resources to people who don't have resources, right? To marginalized community members. And that's good work. It's meaningful work. Fortunately, I live in a housing co-op, so I can kind of sort of be a martyr to some of my social ideals. So not paying off a mortgage or those kind of things that people are told they need to do. So those are also choices and consequences too, right? So so we're going to scale up land back school. I'm grateful that Capilano's agreed to do a monitoring course. So 5 different instructors, and I encourage you to sign up for it. We're going to study and learn and apply in real time. Partnership with Capilano Courier as well around that. So that's it's happening. We don't have good coalition politics. I was happy to see that the Greens in One City and COPE agreed this week to have some kind of partnership. That's like half the battle. Now we're going to figure out the rest of it. But coalitions are really the path forward. And it's tragic that the city of Vancouver right now knows that the communities are weak. They know that there's not a lot of publishing happening. There's not a lot of information sharing, not a lot of knowledge mobilizing, not a lot of infographics, not a lot of short videos that y'all could be producing. And so FIFA is like $1 billion and there's no legacy. And it's like, what could we do with $1 billion in Vancouver? We don't need it to be on the global stage. Everybody knows where Vancouver is. And so that's a really question for us at public policy, the question of like, what can we do with that $1 billion? And why isn't there a legacy for community? And it's because we're not organized. So coalitions are really an important thing. And so witnessing, and that's a Coast Salish practice as well. Witnessing is a way of being in alignment with Coast Salish values, reciprocity, gifting, right? That's critical, right? From potlatch culture, the ancient culture from the land here, where there's an abundance. This is an abundance culture. We should be in abundance for everybody, not just, the gentrification and the land speculators like old school 150 years ago. But colonialism and white supremacy is a hard system to shake. So that is still embedded in our politics. So the promise is to use our skills as media workers and to use our skills as photographers and documenters and put that out into the public space. Just push it out. Not necessarily just on meta products, but in print, in posters. It could be old school. It could be posters on street corners. So that's going to be an exciting summer. As witnessing, we're not winning on the FIFA thing, right? It's way too big. But we can be witnesses. We can use our skills to have that conversation. And that's exciting work when you're inspiring people and impacting community to kind of like come together and just like talk it up and show the other way. So I know there's more than 20. But
If anyone wants to ask a question, now it's open to everyone. Yes, Kate.
Hi, I wanted to ask you about your very interdisciplinary pursuits. And I think I'm in the film program at CapU, and often it's told to us to very specifically pick a lane and pursue that lane. But I very much, all of the things you're mentioning, local photography of musicians, writing with the Courier, illustrating, sculpting, there's so many avenues that are so beautiful to pursue. And I guess through your various pursuits, what's the one consistent trait or thing you've noticed that is really important to do that?
Yeah. I'm fascinated by my ability to think of memories and not share them out loud. So I don't know, is that cognitive skills learning? Tonight I'm remarking that I'm able to do that. Normally I'm not. Like last night, 2-hour talk about FIFA, and I was like bringing it all over the place. But bringing complexity into storytelling, maybe that's a skill I've learned, and bringing deep analysis into bite-sized pieces. So that's probably journalism skill, interview skills. And I mean, I used to see kind of like neoliberal storytelling, it was the new fad, and there's always these fads. But storytelling is it's ancient, oral cultures, and so storytelling I really do lift up. We use the jargon of knowledge mobilizing. Essentially, what our company does for Irwin Labs is we do knowledge mobilizing. So we do really innovative work around urban Indigenous rights across Canada, and that's research, qualitative and quantitative, driving that into policy change and educating people. I always think educating in communications, that's one thing I learned a long time ago, that when you're doing your communications, always include education. Don't presume your audience knows what you're talking about. Don't presume they know why it's important to you. So always, even if it makes your poster ugly, put a quarter of the visual space as an article or a slogan or a statement or some analysis. Don't just hide in
art or pretty design. So yeah, so social impact design is a powerful, beautiful tradition that you can all like deep dive into, like, and we have so many tools now. I think open source is a powerful criteria that I've really been disciplined around. I will use meta products, but I feel a bit disgusted when I do that. And so that I do print production. I will print. We've got some samples here. I still print stuff, and people are like, "Oh no, we'll just do a digital PDF." I'm like, they're not going to get the email with the PDF. So then why? So, but if you mail a print magazine into the mail, print it on WebPress, so your scales are already up at 1,000 or 2,000 for your break evens instead of like 300 or 400 on digital. So that bottom one, if you open to the yellow one, that one on the top of, yeah, there's a map on the back. So that's going out. Open it up. It's like 2 pages from the back. There's a map of Canada, and so that magazine is the first time those 35 organizations saw themselves connected to other organizations, and we're talking about all over Canada, urban Indigenous groups. And so we're like, hey, we exist, and you're getting this in the mail, and you're going to put them on the counter in your office. People are going to pick them up who come into your office because they all matter. They're also a part of the story. And so, because they would never get the email of a PDF, right? So that relationality, that welcoming, that connection is really critical. And I've always done that. And maybe it's retro now, hopefully, but it's also like a commitment. So Wingspan is something that I took over when we took over the organization, the Wild Bird Trust of British Columbia. And so we took that over, and when I say it was a white supremacist birding organization, I don't mean like KKK birders. I mean like very white, entitled, upper middle class North Shore residents who occupied this site literally against the Tsleil-Waututh Reserve. And we ran it. I became the president of the Wild Bird Trust. I'm not even a birder. That was very challenging for the birders. Not only to have the site taken over, but then the site taken over by a non-birder. They're a hidden gem. Oh, you mean? So, hiding in whiteness, right? So these entitlements, settler entitlements, once you start seeing it, you can't unsee it. And so then you start organizing it, and then you start naming it, and then you start writing about it, and then like, okay, maybe I should actually write more about it. Now I do lectures and talks about it around settlers showing up and settler denial as a system. So going deeper and deeper, like, violence against women, for example, 87% of the violence is male violence against women generally. That system is only going to end when men who perpetuate that violence end that violence. It's not the transition houses and the femmes and the women who are organizing and building that infrastructure. It's going to be the men who have to stop that violence. Colonialism is only going to end when settlers end colonialism. It's not going to be ended by reconciliation or Orange Shirt Day. Orange Shirt Day is a total obfuscation. To close up the answer to your question, deep analysis, and then kind of applying it in a way that people can understand, because there's no point in talking over people's heads. But at the same time, you don't want to talk to everybody, because then you're watering down, or you're not kind of having any kind of value principles either. So open source is really good. Do we ever need open source now more than ever? We had more open source tech activism in Vancouver 20 years ago than we do now. It's fucking crazy. Like, this is when we need it. Addiction to meta products, like, it's insane. We built, with W2, we built the largest, this is before Facebook was exploding, there's a thing called Ning, and I built the largest Ning community. We had 4,000 or 5,000 people going to this underground club. It was all through this social platform, pre-Facebook. Facebook was just starting. Like, we were told into open technology, and to see it now, I'm not shaming anybody, but it's just like we have to get off of these. We have to go to Upscroll, we have to go to Blue Sky, we have to go to these other platforms. And so now I'm trying to remember that when I post something on Instagram, I also have to use that time and post it on Blue Sky. Just to kind of help reorientate my habits, because it's so easy to use these systems that are psychologized to be addictive. So we need to break that. Print, old school print. Got to own our printing presses too, then.
Oh my gosh. Okay, we have two more questions and then we're gonna have to go.
Sorry, I'll do shorter answers.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Elliot. I'm hoping to get Capilano's student-run radio back up and running. I'm talking with the club right now, and the president and I are getting the gears turning. What advice do you have to help kickstart that or I guess jumpstart it, right? Get it back up and running, get people interested, because I'm gonna do a radio show, but I'm just, really, it's literally just two of us right now. One to do all the technical stuff and then me to do the programming. But I want to see it grow. I want other people to come in and pitch their ideas for shows. So how do you build that and make it
So
grow?
pre-organize. So if you know you want to make change and community's not ready for it, then educate about why this might matter. So start having guest speaker series, maybe a podcast project, just to warm up the audience. If you're like, hey, does this matter? Why does it matter? So have a talk on why radio matters. Or the other thing would be, I remember I like producing festivals, started this music festival called Kootenay Music Festival. It was like a 40-hour music festival the year before Shambhala Festival started. And that crew we organized with, and we were running a film festival, third biggest film festival in BC. And you're all invited to my Dutch Film Festival, which is a new anti-colonial project, which is another podcast. So my peers wanted to start a radio station in Nelson. And I was like, oh. Anyway, fortunately, they didn't listen to me, because Kootenay Co-op Radio is now like 20 years old, thriving, huge community impact in the Kootenays. So kudos to them. That co-op model is really critical. Co-op requires people, requires surrendering to many other people's views, unless you're just providing the infrastructure, which is also another way to see it. A lot of my work is providing infrastructure, not doing the programming, it's about infrastructure, right? So build progressive infrastructure so that culture can be expressed, right? So your role is not to tell the story, is to create the infrastructure so that community is welcome. So then now you're dealing, now you're going to be a policy geek. You're not going to be producing radio. You're going to be writing policy, creating conditions where that community can flourish. Those are other skill sets than producing radio. You see where that's going. So finding like-minded people, maybe do an inter-campus one, maybe doing a Linmore, Capilano, North Van co-op radio. There's other, like looking at it, Rubik's Cube, maybe change something and then look at it from a different perspective. Back to the question around skill sets, like looking at things from a different perspective, looking around the bend and thinking about what is it actually going to be like around the bend. And that's what you're organizing for. You're not organizing for what's in front of you.
It seems to me that we're in a time of rising fascism all around the world. You mentioned Palestine, Cuba, Iran, all over the place. And as I said, we live in the Middle East, from where all of these policies emerge and go after it, and from where discrimination occurs. And the forces that are meant to resist it at home are obviously capacity is so limited and so weak. And historically they were stronger at the present moment where it seems so importantly or so historically, right? That's its critical. And the solutions, we were very clear. So it just seems that, and it just seems that we're not able to get there. How did we, the solutions that what you say all sound good, but it seems that I don't understand how we get to where we need to get in the time we have.
I'm not going to spin a story and make you feel hopeful around the last thing that you said, which is that there is not enough time to organize before time runs out. I'm not a dystopian. I certainly love feminist dystopic literature and feminist sci-fi literature. So Marge Piercy and Ursula Le Guin and others. But in He, She, and It, in that beautiful book written in 1985, there's like corporate enclaves, city states, permanent war in the Middle East. Every time I hear about that, I remember that book. It was written a long time ago. But the technologists were ironically being hired by the corporate state or allowed to survive because they did some technological hacking processes. There's a certain codependency with the fascist corporate states. Anyway, I digress a bit, but the point being that those communities, and they were dealing with gender politics in that story. That's why it's called He, She, and It, and like this android and stuff. Beautiful book. But those that community survives, right? So it's not like there's Israel could drop a nuclear bomb, but even mainstream media is not saying that that's acceptable. So I think there's time. I think that there has to be a mix of. I'm not into like the slow culture. I have a hard time with that. I find it very liberal and middle class. But that doesn't mean y'all have to be like me. Doesn't mean you have to be like frenetic. But there's a balance that we all find between working in community, FaceTime with community, protecting and working and being accountable for the long-term relationships that you have. Those are the ones that matter. The solidarity. I have friends, I have comrades who I did stuff with decades ago who will always be there for me. I will always be there for them because we know we have that bond. We know we have that deep commitment to liberation, to practice, to solidarity, to community. And that's plays out right now with the Iran stuff, right? Like, I have so many Iranian friends, and some of them are monarchists, and some of them are Zionists, and like, I empathize with their shitty analysis and the tragedy of seeing their friends and family experience what they do in Iran. But I can't not remember the teachings I learned in Central America, the way empire functions. And they don't see that because they didn't learn that. They believe these tropes of human rights. And my friend Sarah Sagai posted yesterday on Instagram from Tehran, and she was saying, like, someone asked her a question like, what is it like, about not having freedom? And this is Sarah, who I went to communication studies with at SFU, so we love discourse analysis. So she did a lovely video, it's online, around what does it mean to be free, right? Because you're saying you're in Germany and you're asking me this question about freedom and for women in Iran, and she's like, well, are you free? And what does freedom mean? So that was exciting to have an Iranian woman push back and say, and I'm not even going to paraphrase her, but we need more of that difficult conversations. We need more difficult conversations. We need more unicorn politics, horseshoe politics, where the right and the left talk to each other, right? Like the critique of Trump, right? They out-organize us. And because the left in Canada has been so pathetic and centrist and sellout and neoliberal and neoliberal unions, and just like betrayal after betrayal after betrayal. So here we are. But let's organize people who we don't agree with. So much common interest. And there's so much of that good work to be done. And we just have to get out of that narrative that, no, they're going to harm us, and they can't. We don't want to work with them because they don't agree with our politics on this issue, or our politics. About 80% we do agree on, right? We're all being screwed by free market capitalism, lack of regulation of the market, and environmental crisis. So if the river is going to flood in your community, it doesn't matter if you're left wing or right wing. The river is going to flood. Call it emergency preparedness. Don't call it climate. Call it emergency preparedness. Work in community. Everyone will work together if you have a common interest, which is like community survival. Go to the same coffee shop, right? So capitalism stratifies us and puts us up against each other, and everyone's making millions off of that. So we can defy it in our day-to-day relationship with saying hello to people on the bus. So start those conversations, and as creative creative producers like all of you, just don't just speak to your own bubble. Speak to other bubbles and defy that conditioning that we're told, stay in your lane.